Permanent des langues officielles.
Welcome to the Standing Committee on Official Languages, Thursday on the 1st of May 2014. We're here pursuant to Standing Order 108 on a motion adopted by the committee on Wednesday the 4th of December concerning the study of the recent budget cuts to CBC Radio-Canada. We have appearing before us today Mr. Lacroix, Ms. Plazinska, and Ms. Kinch from Société Radio-Canada, CBC.
Statement from Monsieur Lacroix, but before we do, Monsieur Godin.
Oui, merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have two motions I'd like to present or table. A notice of motion, rather. Yes, notice of motion.
Je donne un avis de motion pour inviter.
Notice of motion to invite the Minister of Defence to discuss the respective official languages within the Canadian Armed Forces. And my second notice of motion, I'd like to table to invite Heritage Canada Minister so she can explain the delay in grants provided to organizations on official languages matters. Thank you, Mr. Godin, for those two notices of motion. I think we can now proceed with Mr. Lacroix. Good morning, Mr. Chair, members of the committee, and thank you very much for the interest that you are taking in CBC Radio-Canada. As you've mentioned, I'm accompanied this morning by Ms. Patricia Plazinska on my right, who's responsible for our regional services at Radio-Canada, and in particular our services to Francophone minority language communities. And Sheila Kinch, who's responsible for the CBC English services in Quebec. I'll begin by talking about three things this morning. First, measures that we've announced on April the 10th last to balance our budget for the year 2014-15 and what effect this will have on our services. Secondly, on our new conditions of license, which reflect our commitment to minority language communities. And thirdly, the choices we face in developing a new strategic plan. You're undoubtedly aware of the cuts that have been announced, and mostly due to market-related pressures and fixed cost increases, we've had to move to the elimination of several millions of dollars, 33.5. This represents 657 full-time equivalent positions, and we will also have to incur additional one-time payment of $33.5 million to cover severance for these job losses. And these are added, of course, to the $390 million in financial pressures that we've had to manage since 2009. First of all, because of the 2008-9 recession, then the Deficit Reduction Action Plan, the elimination of Local Program Improvement Fund, the LPIF, everybody calls it LPIF, salary funding freezes by the federal government in the last 5 or 6 years, and reductions in Canada Media Fund funding. I believe you'll find in your kits a detailed breakdown of the current job cuts by French and English services and in a regional format as well.
We will no longer compete for the broadcast rights to professional sports. Our amateur sports coverage will be reduced, and future coverage will only be done on a break-even basis. These are two examples of the kinds of choices that we have needed to make in order to balance our budget for 2014-2015 while trying to protect our three Strategy 2015 priorities, which are Canadian programming in prime time, service to the regions, and investment in digital. However, this time around, we couldn't protect them completely. The numbers were simply too big, and our margin for maneuvering too thin from the cuts that we've had to make since 2009. I'll give you an idea of what that means for our regional services. We've had to cancel the rest of our regional expansion plans, including a radio station that we had planned for London, Ontario. CBC's 10-minute late-night newscast in the north has been eliminated. CBC Weekend TV News in Calgary and Edmonton is being consolidated into one regional newscast. CBC's radio's local afternoon show from Thunder Bay and Sudbury will now be a single regional program. On Espace Musique, our daily regional morning program that currently broadcasts from 11 communities will be replaced by one single network program. Et Quelle Histoire, Radio-Canada's daily network TV program from Ottawa-Gatineau, has been reduced from 90 to 36 episodes. A more detailed list of all these programs, the programs that were affected, are also in your folders. Toutes ces compressions sont difficiles à faire.
All of these are, of course, difficult cuts to be making. Not only are we losing incredibly valuable talent, but we're also reducing the programming we provide to Canadians. However, despite what you've just heard, we maintain our focus and commitment to the regions. We've made the decision to protect our existing footprint. This means that we're not closing any stations or bureaus, as we strongly believe that we should be delivering programming that originates and reflects the whole of our country. However, allow me to explain the context of our choices. Funding that we receive from the Local Program Improvement Fund was essential to helping us enhance our television services, particularly for Francophone minority language communities. When the CRTC eliminated the LPIF, the logical decision would have been to cancel all regional programs supported by the fund, or which benefit from that fund. Instead, we chose to find resources from elsewhere within our corporation in order to protect regional news 7 days a week from all of our stations. However, in order to maintain our commitment to news, we canceled all non-news programming in the regions, such as Caméra Boréale, out of Regina, which was produced by 5 young video journalists and who told of their adventures and travel stories throughout northern Canada to Francophones throughout the country. We also had to reduce the number of regional productions for the network show Tout le monde en parlait. In 2010 to 2013, the financing through LPIF supported the production of 20 shows from Francophone communities outside of Quebec, such as La Cloche de Batoche from Winnipeg, Le Sagouin from Moncton, L'École de la Résistance de Penetanguishene from Toronto. Unfortunately, with the new season, which will start on the 6th of May, only one regional documentary, Le Monstre du Pont Rouge from Quebec, will be aired to Tout le monde en parlait. But our commitment to the regions is also reflected in our new CRTC conditions of license, conditions that we continue to meet. Thus, the 7 regional stations serving Radio-Canada, serving Francophone minority communities, will offer at least 5 hours of local programming a week, on average, over a year. In Montreal, CBC will offer Anglophones 14 hours of local television per week, including 1 hour of non-news programming. Our conditions of license require us to hold consultations with Francophone minority communities in each of the following regions: Atlantic Canada, Ontario, Western Canada, and Northern Canada. In fact, Patricia has just returned from our Western consultations, which were held last Tuesday in Edmonton, and you're quite invited to ask her questions on the matter. But let's be clear and frank.
Severe. All conventional television broadcasters are struggling with declining revenue as advertisers are shifting their money to live programs like professional sports and, increasingly, to online. And for CBC Radio-Canada, our commitment to Canadian programming is much more expensive to produce and broadcast, particularly in prime time, than what the private broadcasters are doing, which is mainly simulcasting American programs. This then brings up our funding model. among the 18 most important international public broadcasters in the world, CBC Radio-Canada now ranks 16th in terms of our level of per capita funding for public broadcasting. That's third from the bottom. Expect from us and what we can deliver to them. And in this context, we will need to do less. En 2020, nous devrons être une organisation de...
In 2020, we'll need to be a smaller, more focused public media company that can move more agilely and can adjust to the media consumption habits of Canadians. But we will still and always need to live up to the spirit of the mandate that we were entrusted with more than 75 years ago. That is, to inform, enlighten, and entertain. In many respects, I think you can see that the last Winter Games, the Olympic Games, give you an idea of what the future holds in store. In Sochi, we reached over 33 million Canadians over 17 days. That's more than 10 million Canadians. 1 Canadian of 3 followed the Olympics either on a computer, a tablet, or a smartphone. They consumed about 14 million hours of video content online, live, and on demand. Our English and French services work together to maximize our resources. We partnered with several other broadcasters. We used the latest technologies to deliver a unique personal experience to every Canadian, while simultaneously bringing Canadians together to celebrate our athletes and our country. I believe that moments such as this demonstrate the new strengths of CBC Radio-Canada. And this is what we strive to give to Canadians in future.
These questions.
Merci, Monsieur Lacroix. Nous avons 1 heure et demie.
Thank you, Mr. Lacroix. We have an hour and a half for comments and dialogue. We'll begin over here with Mr. Godin. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Monsieur Lacroix, welcome to our committee. I don't need to remind you that we're always welcome to the Official Languages Committee and to your team as well. I'm having a bit of a time understanding, Mr. Lacroix, when you say, despite all these cuts, Radio-Canada has been maintaining this mandate for over 70 years. I'm sorry, I didn't quite hear that last part of your phrase. I didn't hear the end of your question. No, I'm having difficulty in understanding that CBC Radio-Canada has a mandate, 70 years, and you're still respecting that despite these massive cuts. Despite all these cuts, and I can't understand how you're doing it. Under the Liberal reign, there were cuts of $400 million, I believe. 400 million. And it's as if we've forgotten all of that there's already been 400 million in cuts, and now the Conservative government has cut another 115 million. Not keeping in consideration other expenses that you've had, compressions, and yes, that's right. Millions and millions, as if things could just run on smoothly as usual, no change. It almost seems that the government wants to see CBC disappear. Yet, as you've said in one of your charts here, there are 33, I don't know if this is percentages or what, compared to 67 in France. Our public broadcaster in a country such as ours, a democratic country as this, I don't understand why. Well, you've put a lot into that question. The mandate is on the Broadcasting Act, stems from the Broadcasting Act. However, today, whenever CBC Radio-Canada takes a decision, it's always in function of trying to serve Canadians, to give Canadians those aspects that are in the law and that are part and parcel of our mandate, that are core to our mandate, and that influences how we deliver, inform, enlighten, entertain. I didn't say that we're going to continue as if nothing had happened. Of course not. In my comments, I said, given the cuts that we've had, we have greatly reduced programming as is offered to Canadians. within the expectations of Canadians that we assume and that we've tried to do to fulfill those expectations of Canadians. And any member of my team will tell you that we must meet the expectations of Canadians. But in this context, in the environment that we live in today, which is very complex, these cuts, these compressions will mean that we will deliver less programming to Canadians who depend on, rely on our services. And each time, of course, it's to respect the mandate that we have. Mr. Lacroix, if we cut 2 journalists in Moncton in the Atlantic region, there are 2 journalists. You cut 1 at RDI in Moncton. That's 50% of your staff covering that you've lost. So, if you cut a journalist at RDI, we've lost 50% of the staff. Your mandate is to inform, give the news, but what kind of news can you give? Moncton is 2.5 hours away from Bathurst. If you have your journalist at RDI, if he's on an assignment, well, he's out of sight, out of mind. How can you respect the mandate of CBC? Sure, you have it in theory, in writing, but in fact, in practice, are you really managing to fulfill that mandate seriously, honestly, fully, with the cuts that have been made to Radio-Canada, which are unacceptable, completely ridiculous? The mandate is to serve Canadians everywhere in this country, in minority language situation in Alberta and Prince George, BC, everywhere. And with these cuts, I think that you can't provide what you're telling us you can provide. Well, I didn't say that we are able to meet all expectations of all Canadians and be everything to everyone in the context that we have today. What I'm saying is that collectively, if we take a look at the contribution of Canadians, if you take a look at the overview that for 2014-15, each Canadian will be contributing $29. And if you compare that to other public broadcasters, which you find in this table, well, the more you reduce, the more the environment is constrained and limited, and the lower the contribution of individual Canadians per capita, the less we can actually satisfy. If you're a public broadcaster, if you take a look at the BBC in Britain, for example, $97 per citizen. So, in terms of the services that we offer, given the resources that we have, we are still respecting our mandate. This is Hobson's choice. I mean, we really are between a rock and a hard place. If we take a look at the financial resources that we have, we are still trying to maintain the respect of our mandate. Yes, but the results will be that you're going to lose services in the regions. No, we feel that the regions must contribute, given the scale of these cuts. But in the daily operations, and Patricia will give you an example in a moment, what we're doing when we get information from a community in order to adjust our programming. But conditions of license that we have in the CRTC for the regions will be respected. But for the time being, respecting what we can afford. Well, you talked of La Saguine, for example. People in the regions, in minority regions, see it disappearing. I mean, we find ourselves reflected in the programming. It's a choice. It's a choice. We keep the news. Yes, of course it's a choice, but the mandate of CBC has been cut. You can't fulfill that mandate adequately with cuts of this scale. The minister yesterday in the House said, oh, no, it's not us. It's Radio-Canada. They're making the choices. They're calling the shots. Well, are you not doing your job, or do you not have the means to do your job?
Thank you, Mr. Godin. Mr. Lacroix.
Oui.
Okay. Dans cet environnement.
Well, in this environment, I always come back to the same thing. We announced major cuts with the goal of balancing our budget for 2014-2015. In the current, our environment is changing. We've showed you what kind of funding is available to other public broadcasters according to the services that they offer. What I'm saying is that with the resources that we have, our goal with the mandate that we have, which hasn't changed since 1991, you know, the Broadcasting Act has not been changed since 1991. The mandate is still to offer wide-ranging programming that informs and entertains. That's the mandate that we have, and according to that, we have to make the choices that you've heard. Thank you, Mr. Gourde. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Lacroix, thank you for being here this morning. My question concerns the mandate, the environment of today, the competition that Radio-Canada has from private broadcasters. To what extent or to what point is Radio-Canada still able to stand out in different fields? Have you seen increases in listenership, or are there certain niches where you're having trouble keeping audiences getting funding? Because we know that Radio-Canada has a mix of public and private funding. Public funding is dropping, and so is advertising. Why is that? Well, there are many different aspects to your questions. I'll start by talking about Canadians who listen and watch CBC and Radio-Canada, because with our mandate, we succeed fairly well. Our BBM results just came out for winter, and Radio-Canada's audience is up almost everywhere. With the audiences, we saw almost 10 points higher. And Unité 9, Les Enfants de la Télé, we've seen increases in the number of people watching us. That's Radio-Canada French language television. We are also aware of how important our services are in the regions and on our radio. There's no advertising on our radio except on Espace Musique, so we have no advertising revenue on radio. Now, if we look at CBC, CBC in the same way has some major programs that have been very successful. They're things that Canadian watches. The Olympics were, for us, an excellent way to combine our resources with private broadcasters and to meet the goals that we had stated. An offer to win the rights that was reasonable, reasonable financial model, and a return on Canadians' investment. In this context, have no doubt that advertising revenue is dropping. And that's happening for all broadcasters. Us, CTV, Global. We see the same thing on TVA. And you'll see that in the CRTC's recent statistics. We're seeing revenue growth in digital streams, and that's why over the last few years, all broadcasters, private and public, appeared before various committees to say, and before the CRTC, that we have to pay a certain amount of money for the signal, for frequency. Our arguments were not heard and were not listened to. Long story short, to say that in the current context, advertising revenues are dropping, and broadcasters like us, despite the quality of our programming, our financial models are under pressure. We know that Radio-Canada CBC lost the hockey rights, and that's something that affects a lot of people. And you're saying that all media are having a hard time selling advertising, but the private sector was able to pay a huge amount of money to get the broadcasting rights for hockey. Is there a contradiction there? No, because, well, you've certainly followed what Rogers did. Rogers' business model is very simple. They're going to turn CTV into a hockey platform. They're going to take all of their specialized channels. They're going to change them into hockey channels. So Sportsnet 1, 2, 3, 4, the Score Network, all of those platforms will be used to allow Canadians to watch every hockey game that exists. So it's a completely different business model. It's vertically integrated, and now they're going to be able to sell you this on your tablet or your smartphone. It's completely different from the business model and the situation that we have at CBC. How will Radio-Canada stand out, given that you do have stable funding from the government, roughly $1 billion, that should allow you to keep a certain level of quality? How will you be able to counterbalance the drop in advertising revenue? Well, the drop in advertising revenues, the way that we make the choices that you heard, well, that's attempting to increase our income and cut costs, because as you heard what I said, there has not been any additional funding to our base funding for many, many years. It has not been adjusted for inflation, and I've never said since over the last 7 years that we needed more money. We wanted multi-year, stable, predictable funding, and in this context, we wanted to have enough money to be able to respect our mandate and provide services to Canadians. And that's what I've repeated over and over in the current context. Now, the funding model from several years ago doesn't seem to hold up anymore. In the current context, well, a few years ago, Radio-Canada and CBC were able to compete to have in its programming stable sporting events. We're not going to be able to do that anymore because of dollars and the platforms and where and how Canadians will be watching them. So the environment has completely changed, and that's something we need to work on, and that's my key message today. The mandate, is it too ambitious for the future? Would you wish to see your mandate changed? Well, that's certainly a government decision. What the government wants to do with the public broadcaster, and so what the Act requires us to do, and what we're able to do with the funding that we have. Thank you, Mr. Lacroix. Ms. Saint-Denis. Mr. Lacroix, you spoke about the mandate to inform and entertain. The drop in funding that you have, and that's true, we understand, we have all the documents, but it's a question of choices. It's a question of choices. And so my first question, do you believe that the commercial choices of Radio-Canada are based on what's done by private broadcasters? For example, entertainment programs during prime time. I watch news programming. Is Radio-Canada not getting away a little bit from its original mandate? And would it not be better to use, in terms of programming, I know that at Radio-Canada French language, there are programs that are produced in other provinces. I heard a report this week on Toronto, on the Radio-Canada, and I think it was the first time I'd heard that, the transit issues in Toronto, and I said, oh, good. Montreal isn't the only place that has problems. Toronto has even more, but it's the first time I heard anything about that. There's a noon hour program, or a program at 2 o'clock in the afternoon when nobody's watching TV. Every once in a while, there's a program on the other provinces in French, which is broadcast, but it's never during prime time. Maybe, when the choices you make, maybe this is where we disagree, and more specifically, minority groups are not sufficiently promoted or don't have a large enough place on radio and on television. And I'll continue, and you can answer all of my questions at once. Your choices are made in the context of an overall vision. When Ron MacLean, you know, when he spoke about referees the other week, well, Radio-Canada did not have a reaction to that. It didn't really pay a lot of attention to that incident. And does that not represent a certain vision, which, again, goes with certain choices at Radio-Canada? Well, I asked Ms. Saint-Denis, well, in terms of the contribution that the regions make to our news programming and the way that we reflect the regions more and more, because we're aware of the mandate that we have to reflect the regions in our news programming. But I have to say, with all due respect, I listened to your comments on our programming, and I have some issues with that. When you talk about our variety programs that are very boring, I can't accept such a comment because our television performance has never been so good. The numbers that I'm showing you, be it for dramas, for our public affairs programs in primetime, because again, we're the only ones who have major public affairs and targeted programs and news programs in primetime. If you look at the overall picture, the people who watch Radio-Canada will tell you, will say, bravo, congratulations, you're meeting your mandate, because once again, if we look at our audience numbers and our performance, it's spectacular. It's never been so high. So keep that in mind. Now, going back to news and the importance that we give to official language minority communities and how we reflect them, I'll ask Patricia to add to this. Thank you, Hubert. Well, we do make choices, as you say. And for a while, we've been hearing French language minority communities say that they need to see themselves reflected on our programming in a more regular way. So we have a three-point structure. First of all, a structural issue. We've taken Montreal. We've split Montreal. Our Montreal administration from our national administration, because we have programming for Montreal, which is a region like another, but it's also the largest francophone region in the country. And then we have national program, whose goal and mandate is to reflect the entire country. And so with this separation of the two administrations, there's been a direct impact on programs. The creation of, for example, L'Heure du Monde, a new mandate for Culture Club. There are things that all of our regional stations can do to be close to their communities. The second point is a new approach, a new positioning for our news, and that is to talk about the country. And give you the example, you said that you heard news about Toronto sort of by accident. Well, I can say that we have regular, frequent reports from all the regions of the country, and they've been added to in the past year with the addition of one reporter in Acadia and another in Alberta, and their role is to directly contribute to the 10 o'clock newscast. And over several years, we've had people on the ground for RDI across the country, and our listenership is up on RDI, and regional programming represents about a third of the population. In terms of our daytime programming, we've also added coverage. At the most recent CRTC hearings, certain communities asked the CRTC if we couldn't give Radio-Canada a certain quota for those communities. The CRTC judged that that wasn't a good idea at the editorial level, and we support it. Because it's not a good idea to regulate the number of news stories. However, with the addition of those two journalists, we have a representation at 14% of the regions on the evening newscast, the Téléjournal. The third point of our strategy is our ability to create, with this philosophy of telling stories from across the country, to create contact points between all citizens to tell stories about the country but that are based in a specific region. And let me give you an example. With the Canada soldiers from Afghanistan coming home, well, 2 years ago we would have done reports from Valcartier because it's close. We go there regularly. We have a number of journalists in Quebec who cover Valcartier regularly. However, We did our coverage with our new reporter from Alberta, from Edmonton. And so it's this new philosophy that allows us to tell stories from across the country and to tell stories that affect all Canadians, but from different places across the country. Thank you. Ms. Bateman. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Lots of questions, Monsieur Lacroix, and I mean, you've got a big operation, 8,000 employees, and you've got some new tools that are available to you, such as Facebook, Twitter, and I'm just curious how CBC goes about their utilization. Is it another layer? Do you need more people to manage that, or is it a tool that makes you more efficient and effective and actually, you know, you can find out, you can use as almost a market research method?
Completely embedded into the media lines, not another layer. We are asking right now our staff, nos artisans, our CBCers to actually work with these tools because that's what allows us to do actually more. And as you see from Sochi, 1 Canadian out of 3 didn't go to television to watch the Olympic Games. They watched it on our app. It was downloaded 2.5 million times. That's the kind of stuff that we do.
That leads me to my
Absolutely.
next question, actually, and I'm very gratified to hear your response to that one. Young people no longer buy a television. I don't have a television where I live here. So how do you reach them? How are you reaching those people?
We reach them by providing podcasts, by involving them in social media, by sending them to our catch-up TV sites, by TouTV, for example, where you don't have to actually be in front of your television set on Tuesday nights at 9 to watch Les Enfants de la Télé. You'll watch it directly on TouTV. That's the way we do this. I think when you look at what CBC Radio-Canada has done there, we kind of lead the show. People are very proud of what we do. We raise the bar for everybody else. And that's where, and as you saw from Strategy 2015, one of the 3 pillars was we are going to be a leader in digital and we are going to protect a certain amount of investment in our budgets to actually go there because the tendencies of the world,
okay, so
that's where we're going.
Given that you're talking about the budget, and that's of great interest to me, you know, I see that Les Parents is on, I think, Netflix.
Absolutely.
You know, how do you get revenue? Well, first of all, how much of your original programming is actually on these non-traditional platforms, and what kinds of revenue do they bring in? You can tell, once a chartered accountant, always.
I'm happy that you're into numbers because you know what? I'm into numbers too, particularly in the environment in which we are. So we have partnerships and commercial agreements, let's call it with Netflix, for example, where some of our programming, which was not used and well, frankly, living on shelves after their showings on our traditional networks that were packaged, sold to Netflix, and we continue envisaging other agreements of that kind.
So there is a revenue stream.
Absolutely. It's not important yet. It's not significant at all, but we are extremely aware
of that. But it's incremental to what the revenue source was.
Absolutely. Okay. Because Madame, as you know, the model for funding CBC.
Contribution costing, we used to call it.
Sorry?
Contribution costing was what we used to.
So what we have at CBC Radio-Canada is a hybrid model. You know that for years, government has said, and the CRTC has said, if you want to continue, we're not going to provide you with more dollars, but if you want to continue delivering new services to Canadians, you have to do it on your own.
Find different
and that's what we have gone out and we've done. There's about $400 to $500 million of commercial revenues, generally, and subscription revenues, and revenues from rental of our facilities, and from all other initiatives that come to add to the $1 billion in order to deliver in this environment, in a complicated environment, services to Canadians. That's the business model.
Now, speaking of complicated environments, I want to ask a few questions about CBC's mandate, and where does it come from?
The Act.
Perfect. So, the mandate regarding official languages, what is it? Do you have to give equal...
De façon équivalente. The words are exactly that. De façon équivalente. Not equal, équivalente.
an equivalent way. The word is equivalent. All right, thank you.
How does the CBC interpret its mandate regarding the promotion of both national languages? Or does it?
It is the DNA of the Your Public Broadcaster. We deliver our services in both official languages across the country, from one ocean to the other, up to the top. And it's so embedded in us that now we are more and more one corporation. We share services in the regions, at the network level. We share each other's expertise.
In the regions?
Absolutely.
Do you not share services here or
Absolutely.
in
What I'm
Toronto?
Regions meaning in
Like,
every
up to Canada?
we across the country.
Yeah.
Because we have two levels. We have a network program that goes across the country, and then we have programs that come from the different regions where we are present. And in there, we have sometimes CBC and Radio-Canada, and more, CBC and Radio-Canada work together. And we can give you a whole bunch of examples of how incredibly close and tightly knit our operations are right now.
And that's good to hear.
Absolutely.
So what importance do you give to official languages in the distribution of your budget?
It's
Percentage-wise or?
what we do is we look at the services we have to render Canadians, and we then look at how do we best serve them, what services must we fund. We look at the resources we have, and we allocate it based on one corporation. That's what we do.
So how does it shake down?
It shakes down.
Ballpark.
Ballpark, right now, there's about, I would say, close to 55% of our budget that goes to CBC, and about 45% goes to Radio-Canada, not on budget. I should say on les allocations du gouvernement.
45%.
45, it will vary over, we just looked at this right now, but in the last 15 or 16 years, it will vary between 60-40 to 55-45. Right now, it's much closer to 55-45 than it is to 60-40.
Thank you. I want to understand what the CRTC's role is in ensuring that CBC provides diversified and quality programming in both languages, or does it have a role?
You better believe, madam, that it has a role. It brings us it used to be every 5 years. The last time we had to wait 13 years, but it brings us in front of it. It looks at the contribution of CBC in what we famously call the ecosystem of media in the country. It understands the mandate that we have, and then after hearing a number of intervening parties, and we did this in November 2012, it establishes the conditions of license under which we can actually broadcast our services across the country. And that's where, when I spoke of conditions of license, that's what I was referring to.
Okay, thank you very much. Before we go to Mr. Chisu, there's been discussions, I understand, amongst members from the various parties, and there's a consensus that we would like to go to 11:15 for this discussion and move the discussion of the debate over the motion from Mr. Godin to another meeting. So if you're amenable to that, Monsieur Lacroix, we'd like to go for an extra 15 minutes.
We'll do whatever the committee wants to do.
Well, thank you for your cooperation, and I'll give the floor to Mr. Chisu.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Thank you very much, Mr. Lacroix, for your presentation. It was an excellent presentation, and I understand a lot of things that what the CBC is doing. I know that the CBC has a mandate, which is very clearly described in the Broadcasting Act. So, of course, I consider this one as limitation, that you need to work inside this act. I was looking at your fiscal picture. So and I have seen that you have, on 2013, 1st of March, you have had $646,000 for revenues. So, and you are receiving from us, so 646 million revenues, and you receive from the government of Canada $1.1 billion approximately. So it is, and I have seen that the revenue, for example, from 2012 to 2013 dropped by 6.2%, and the government financial contribution dropped only by 0.6%. So my question is this one: looking at your great management skills and how you plan to increase the revenues in the CBC in the future, because it is a place for that, and I think that you will be able to do it, and I'm confident that you have a plan for it.
So, a couple of things. First, the mandate comes from the Broadcasting Act. The CRTC also enforces the mandate on CBC Radio-Canada. When I sat in front of the chairman and the CRTC in November 2012, the first thing that the CRTC chairman said when he looked at us was, we understand, we expect you to deliver a wide range of programming to Canadians that basically informs, enlightens, and entertains them. Please go ahead and show me how you're going to do this. This was an environment which had a number of actors in it. Over time, that has changed. Yes, increasing revenues is key. To be able to increase revenues, you need levers. The levers that we have, and that was my hint of a few minutes ago, are limited to the conventional advertising environment. Conventional advertising, as you know, has been eroding. And when this mandate was drawn, it didn't have 742 different channels on your satellite beamed into your home in 1991. You had a very specific number of broadcasters. There were a very specific number of platforms on which you actually showed television or listened to radio, and the number of players were not integrated like they are now. So that was the model. This is the model that funded us over the years. Revenues started moving on the digital piece. We adapted to that. As you know, we have a very, very strong presence in digital, but we don't have 52 specialty channels like Rogers or like a Bell to take revenues and actually support the conventional network. Hence, the conversation we had a few years ago with value for signal and how important it is, because as you know, do you have a cable bill or a satellite bill, sir?
Cable bill.
Cable bill. So on your cable bill, when you pay, let's say, $50 a month, $0 of that amount comes to CBC, to Radio-Canada, to CTV, or to TVA. $0. Because the broadcaster, the distribution unit, Bell or whatever in your environment, takes our signal off air and sends it back to you in its package. We said a few years ago, we think that has value, and we should be paid, Bell, for the dollars, some dollars, for the fact that you're taking our signal and you're making a business model and a business out of it. Arguments were not withheld. It actually went up to the Supreme Court, the CRTC, and it's a complicated story. We won't go there. So, answer your question, yes, we are looking at maximizing our revenues on our television piece. We are looking at maximizing the revenues on the digital piece. We take our real estate environment, we're trying to shrink it, we're trying to sell some of the places that we are to transform ourselves into tenants. We're trying to rent out the space that we create, that's rental revenues. There are only two ways for us to do this. Either we increase the revenues or we reduce our costs in an environment where the shrinking pie of advertising revenues that we have access to is smaller and smaller.
Okay, thank you very much. Also, I have seen that the CBC has around, it is a great corporation and has around 8,000 employees. So, of course, there are a lot of employees like my age, you know, they are baby boomers, they are retiring and so on. And, how you are working with Canada's francophone and bilingual universities to ensure that the new graduates have the skills have the technical skills needed to work in the industry, that this industry is rapidly changing as we know.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chisu. Madame
Perhaps,
Plazinska?
yes, thank you. We do work with the universities. We in fact have programs where we create internships with Laval, with Université Laval in Quebec City, with the Université de Montréal. We use internship programs to ensure that we have young people coming in, getting training on how Radio-Canada does business, and then sending them out into the regions for replacement work during the summer, frankly. And often these young people will end up being recruits and getting jobs in some of our regions across the country. I would say that, I wish there were more Francophone universities and Francophone universities outside of Quebec that could supply us with staffing. And one of the discussions that we've had for years with Collège Saint-Boniface has been effectively that we need a journalism program there, that we encourage them to build one. We've given them all kinds of support and all kinds of ideas, and I hope that someday that will happen, because ideally we would have students becoming journalists in Francophone communities out west who come from there and who remain there, as opposed to being a revolving door for young student journalists from Quebec going out west and then coming back to Montreal. But we do work with them, mainly with internship programs, and many of our top journalists or managers lecture, spend time within classes to familiarize people with what Radio-Canada does and how we work.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman,
yes.
Just allow me 1 sec, since we're going to 1:45. I'd like Sheila to tell you what we do with Concordia also, because that'll give you an idea of what CBC does also, just as an example in Quebec.
So what we do is we have the same thing as Radio-Canada has. We have an internship with the journalism school at Concordia, and what we do is we bring students in for the summer and on paid internships so that they can develop the skills they need, that when they graduate, we have somebody prepared to graduate and come into the business. The other thing that we're doing now that we've started recently with the journalism program is they have a digital class, and what we're doing is working with the digital class that their final projects are posted on the CBC Montreal website, so they get the experience of working in a real newsroom and doing a project that we oversee and work with them on, and we understand what their skills are and what they can bring to us. So that project we started this year, and we're going to continue on a term-by-term basis with Concordia.
Okay, thank you very much. Mr. Nichols.
Mr. Chair. Mr. Lacroix, I'd like to thank you for providing us with this chart, because when I look at it, the majority of these countries listed here, notably Norway, Switzerland, Germany, Sweden, Finland, and the UK, these are some of the most competitive economies in the world. And these countries, I think these countries' governments are conscious that well-informed population, increased transparency help an economy in general and help it become more competitive. So when I look to CBC and programs like the Fifth Estate and Enquête, these are programs that uncover corruption in our country, and in doing so help our economy. More locally to me, we have journalists like Mike Finnerty on CBC Montreal, who asks difficult questions to Quebec politicians and tries to get people engaged in the public process. And it's in this context that it's with sadness that I look at these cuts and the miscomprehension of successive Liberal and Conservative governments about the value of a public broadcaster. Noting on the flip side of here, at the very time of the explosion of channels that you mentioned and the explosion of media in the 90s, you have a $400 million cut from the Chrétien government. And I just have to commend you on the amazing adaptations that you've made over the years, that you're still standing, that you're still providing services to Canadians around the country. And I shake my head and I commend you for the incredible adaptations that you made. But I must pass my questions, and the majority of them will go to Ms. Kinch. Can you give us the details, Ms. Kinch, of the cuts that will affect CBC Montreal?
We will have 10 cuts that we announced yesterday within the CBC. At this point, I think it's 4 or 5 people will be walking out of the building. They had their contracts terminated and their positions declared redundant. Other people, we've found ways to save positions through vacancies and through reassignments of work.
Thank you. I'm wondering if you're willing to meet with the QCGN in Ilan to discuss how CBC intends to meet its obligations under the Official Languages Act and the conditions of its broadcasting license towards Canada's English linguistic minority communities.
In fact, just last year we had 2 meetings with QCGN. One was in Quebec City, where we brought people in from the région éloignées and met with them, with our French colleagues as well, to discuss their needs. And then we had another one in Montreal last year as well, where we brought local groups that are under the QCGN umbrella to come in and talk about our programming. We regularly meet with Ilan. I think it was just a couple of months ago that our manager of cultural affairs and our manager of communications met with Ilan to discuss our programming, and at the same time we are offering them now pitch workshops, which are how can they get their stories to us in a way that will get them onto the CBC so we can address the concerns of the English-speaking communities.
So the collaboration will continue.
So yes, we will meet with them. Sorry.
Oh, wonderful.
That really was your question.
Yes. Also, the CRTC recently made it a condition of license that CBC will not spend less than 6% of its national English language programming budget in Quebec. The CRTC also expects CBC English Quebec independent production will not fall below 12% of their national independent production budget. How is CBC planning to implement these conditions of license, and how will CBC report on these investments in a way that is transparent and meaningful?
Do you want to answer that? Well, what I can tell you is, first of all, that is it's a network commitment. It is not a local commitment. Locally, we continue to work with our English language independent producers by producing 6 documentaries every year. Recently, we brought in our executives from Toronto to meet with the independent producers here in Quebec to address how that money would be spent, to talk to them about how they could make their pitches to the network and what the network was looking for in terms of programming moving forward.
So these docs are produced by local Quebec independent companies. Curiously, the cuts that you mentioned, the 10 cuts, were these mostly from television, the television wing, or the radio wing?
Every program was touched.
Every program was touched.
Every program, radio, TV, and digital.
Can you give the committee the details of the budget cuts and how they will affect each regional station? Is it one region in particular in Quebec that will be affected, or is it?
Sheila will tell you how we are structured in Quebec and how we deliver our services out of Quebec City and out of Montreal to English-speaking Quebecers.
Sorry, one supplementary is that in this chart here you have a to be determined. Yes. And you have English services 55 cuts. Will any of those be involving Quebec?
Are you talking about Quebec City, or
no,
are you talking
Quebec
about the whole region? As I told you, we have 10 positions that are being cut in Quebec.
Yes.
So Sheila, I think the member would appreciate understanding what you do out of Montreal, what the Montreal CBC delivers its services, and how you do in Quebec City, and what the Quebec City station does for the rest of the country.
Right.
So that we don't have as many stations in the province of Quebec as Radio-Canada does. We actually deliver our services out of 2 different stations.
Yes. So what we do is, naturally in Montreal, we have a more urban focus on the English language minority community, and we have many special projects that you've probably heard about if you listen to Mike Finnerty, where we specifically target the issues and concerns for that community. In Quebec City, we have 2 programs, Quebec AM, our morning show, and Breakaway, our afternoon program, which address the issues of the English language speaking community across the province. We also have a reporter in Sherbrooke, so that we have somebody available in the Eastern Townships where we have a larger English speaking community, and we have a traveling journalist. We have a journalist who travels throughout the province and tells stories and that are clearly of interest to our audience. As well, we go on remote as often as we can. It's very important for us to get out into the community and to talk with the community itself. So recently our Quebec City Bureau went to Baie des Chaleurs and did a remote there. 3 weeks ago, I think it was, we were in Lennoxville for Quebec AM and we did a remote show. Actually, it was more than 3 weeks because it was around the election. So we went down to Lennoxville to do a remote show there to talk about the issues and the concerns during the election. So we're constantly finding ways to reach out to our audience and really speak to them in more on a one-to-one level as well.
Last question.
Last question would be, there's a substantial TV and film community in Montreal as well. Has it ever been within the plans of CBC to perhaps provide a dramatic show that's produced out of Montreal rather than a documentary in the future that maybe could provide a sort of different angle to what's usually offered by CBC programming produced out of Toronto?
Actually, we had such a show. It was called 18 to Life. It was based in Montreal on our primetime television schedule. A couple of years ago, it wasn't renewed. That's something that we're always looking at. It's a question of resources and how we can best impact Canadians through the primetime television schedule. It's a question of the funding of that schedule, how we trigger what funding mechanism. But we've always been interested in trying to showcase different parts of the country in our television schedule on CBC. I mean, look at what we had for a long time. We had Republic of Doyle out of St. John's, Newfoundland. We had Arctic Air, which we will no longer carry, but which was the North and Vancouver. We had Little House on the Prairie, which is Saskatchewan, again, no longer on the schedule. Heartland, which is there, which is Calgary. Erica, which was Toronto. I mean, we do that, and most often, and this is something that we're very proud of, the city, the Canadian city, is as much a character in the show than the actors themselves, and that's why you recognize the program as being a CBC program or a Made in Canada program.
Okay, thank you very much. Mr. Daniel.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, witnesses, for being here this morning. I'm kind of going to follow on a little bit about your workforce and the changing technologies that are coming along. I mean, obviously, I actually don't have TV at home at all. I actually get it completely off the internet in terms of all the things that I need. And so, you know, you can see the changing environment that's happening in the broadcast industry. And my question is severalfold, but let's start with this one. One of the key things that we've noticed from a number of other committees is that getting technical Francophone staff is very difficult because there are very few universities or colleges that provide technical engineering degrees, etc. As you're transitioning into the future like this, say over the next few years, 5 years, 10 years, whatever, you're going to need more of these sorts of folks. What's your plan?
Certainly what I can tell you is that we, when I was talking earlier about our relationship with some of the universities, Francophone universities in Quebec and colleges outside of Quebec, we work with the Université de Moncton, we work with Collège Laurentien, and here in Ottawa, Cité Collégiale, Ottawa-Gatineau, Cité Collégiale is a very important supplier for us of young young journalists and young artisans, as we call them, young professionals, who in fact do come in to us with an ability to do technical work. But I would say that what used to be a fairly strict and a fairly clearly defined distinction between editorial staff and technical staff is no longer the way that we work, because in fact our journalists use Twitter, they do their own editing, they often will do their own shooting, they'll do it on their iPhones, they'll do it on iPads, they'll do it with light cameras. We have video journalists. The technology has become lighter so that the mix of responsibilities that our professionals have is becoming even more complex, in the same way that some of the people who some of the professionals who were previously exclusively technical are now working in digital. Our engineers are doing graphics, are doing all kinds of creative work that contributes to the quality of our programming. And perhaps I could just add one little comment to what you were saying about not having a television. It's true, but whether it's a television or whether it's a radio as a piece of equipment is really not the issue. There's visual, there's audio content, and that audio and visual content has to be produced by somebody. Whether the actual platform on which you consume it is an old-fashioned radio, AM, FM radio, whether it's a television that's on cable or satellite, or whether you have a large screen monitor that connects to your internet, the video content has to be produced by our teams. And those are the same teams that will produce material for the web as the ones that will produce material for the traditional platforms, because our teams across the country, as Radio-Canada as well as the CBC, are fully integrated journalist and production teams.
But presumably you have your own networks that need to be maintained, your connections to the internet, your radio, your radio in terms of the technical transmission,
yeah,
etc. Are you able to get the right kind of people, the engineers that can actually put that up and maintain that, or how do you propose doing that in the future?
Certainly we have the right people. I think the problem is that the traditional platforms, and I don't know if Hubert wants to get into that, is the whole distribution network is a very heavy one for the traditional platforms, and it certainly is a very costly one for which we haven't had any increased funding to maintain all of those transmitters across the country. So it's an aging infrastructure, and certainly it's one that is very costly to maintain.
But presumably you're going to be transitioning into the newer technologies and the newer radio systems for wireless, etc.
Yes,
and all those old ones will be just antiques, really.
But I'll tell you something, and I heard that very clearly during the consultation that I just came back from in Edmonton. We spoke to about 400 people, and some of them were listening to us on the web, because we had about 100 people in the room in Edmonton, and the rest of the people were connected to us through video. We were broadcasting on the web, and so people were contributing to that conversation by texting us or by emailing us from the 4 western provinces and from the 3 territories. And what people were telling us is that we are very much in a transition period, in the same way that we had people who, just like yourself, sir, no longer consume media on traditional platforms. Other people were telling us, wait a minute, I don't even have cell coverage in my community, let alone broadband. So don't abandon me, because I'm not there yet and my community isn't there yet. And I think that's particularly true for Francophone communities in many parts of the country, because Francophones are not necessarily concentrated in large centers, but you'll have, whether it's Manitoba, Alberta, Saskatchewan, you'll have a sprinkling of small communities all over the countryside that are struggling with the connectivity issue.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you very much, Mr. Daniel. Monsieur Natel.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Alors,
thank you, Chair. So first of all, I'd like to thank you for being here today. In the current context, I imagine you had a few, you were a little bit apprehensive coming here. And Mr. Lacroix, I'll call you Hubert. I know you generally sign any communications with just your first name. So Hubert, you told us about how you're performing well with audience numbers. And you're right, and I'm very happy to hear that. I'm very happy to see that the BBM surveys are showing that, because as a Francophone Canadian from Montreal, from Quebec, as a Quebecer, I am a great fan of the Radio-Canada brand. And I've always had the impression that during the current context, where Radio-Canada is being described as a brand that's having trouble. And I don't see what people are talking about, because from my point of view, the programming put out by Radio-Canada on radio and television is as relevant as ever, and the BBM numbers are showing that as well. So I don't understand how Minister Glover can say what she said, for example, on April 9th. It's the drop in audience numbers that are causing problems at Radio-Canada. Radio-Canada has enough money to meet its mandate under the Broadcasting Act, and it's up to Radio-Canada to offer Canadians the programming they want for Francophones and Anglophones. So I'd like to hear your comments on that, because I find that very problematic. Well, Mr. Nantel, I wouldn't wish to interpret what the minister said. What I would rather do is go back to Mr. Godin's question from a little bit earlier and from other members' questions on our level of service, because, you know, there's a direct relationship between the level of funding provided to the public broadcaster and the quality of its service. And more pressure there is on our financial resources, well, more of an effect is going to be on our programming. If we want to have a public broadcaster like the broadcaster in New Zealand that has no public radio, that has almost entirely commercial television, well, then you give $21 per Kiwi. If you want to have something that resembles the multitude of services that the British receive, well, you can see that they invest $97 a person. So there's a direct link between the funding that's available to a public broadcaster and the level of service that it offers. And all of that comes under an umbrella that's called the mandate. So if you have $5 to provide a service, you'll look at what the service has to do. It has to inform, it has to entertain, and it's up to civil society to decide, is that enough? Would $5 be enough? Is our democracy affected? Will our news programs be less pertinent? And that's where the debate is. We have a very wide-ranging mandate. We have a mandate that has not been changed since 1991, a mandate that doesn't talk about digital platforms, that talks about television and radio only. Mr. Daniel earlier spoke to a transition towards digital, and yes, but more than 95% of the people who watch our television programs are still sitting in their seat when those are broadcast on TV. So, if you'll allow me to interrupt, so what you're saying corresponds exactly to what I think most people involved in Radio-Canada feel. But when I read, for example, your speech ended by saying, in 2020, we're going to have an organization that is more flexible and more able to adapt. Well, that seems very relevant, but you also added it's going to be smaller and more targeted. And I'm concerned that your slogan for 2015 to 2020 will be everywhere a little bit instead of everywhere for everyone. It seems like you're sort of having to give up a little bit. And what you're saying is that there's a direct link between what you can do and the funding available. And what I see here is a fatalistic attitude. Well, a fatalistic attitude? No, Mr. Nantel. What we have here is the realization, and the message that I want to leave with you today is that in terms of what you expect from the public broadcaster and in terms of the mandate that we have under the Broadcasting Act, we have an economic environment where our model and the model used by all stakeholders in the ecosystem, the media ecosystem in Canada, it's complicated. We have access to X number of $1 million every year from an advertising pie that's being divided among many, many platforms. We have an enormous mandate, and we have funding that is falling. And so we have choices to make. And it's painful for me because one of the most personal links that I have was with the sports service. Well, is it not in the nature of a generalist television programming? Now, and I agree with you because I think the goal is to talk about agriculture during the Green Week and then to talk about music, etc., etc. But the problems that we're identifying at Radio-Canada, are these not the same problems shared by all generalist stations? The answer is yes. Okay, thank you. Now, Mr. Williamson.
Colleagues for being here today. I have a couple comments. Mine will be a bit kind of just a shotgun approach, a few questions, but I'll say off the top, I do appreciate the work CBC does, Radio-Canada does, particularly when it comes to minority language communities in presenting a national platform for news, so we don't live in silos in our respective provinces across the country. I think that's one of your strengths is bringing news from different regions to different parts of the country, and I see that in my home province of New Brunswick, and I'm also aware of the good work you do in bringing news, for example, from Western Canada right into to Quebec, where I don't believe your competitors do that nearly as well. Turning to a couple questions, I'm curious to kind of get your thoughts or your thinking around. You have the mandate to do this to connect Canadians, but at the same time, you obviously have commercial pressures when it comes to programming. How do you determine what programmings are going to make it to air, and when it comes to looking at changes and cutting them? And for example, Arctic Air is one that has recently, I've noticed, I believe being phased out, or it's been cut. But for a while, it seemed to be getting some pretty good promotion on your network. That's just one example. I'm just curious, kind of globally, how does your commercial mandate mesh with the need to connect Canadians?
Mr. Williamson, that is the most important question that our programmers ask themselves every day. That's the Heather Conway, who leads our English services, and that's Louis Lalonde and their teams who leads French services. When they look at their television schedule, they have to compose with trying to balance a television schedule which is clearly differentiated, or trying to differentiate ourselves from the commercial broadcasters, which means Canadian program in prime time, which means marketplace in prime time, which means public affairs. If you look at what we do in French, you have Découverte on Sunday nights. You will have public affairs, but something like Enquête, which now works with Marketplace more and more at developing stories that nobody actually investigates, because that's what we do. We look at the international piece because, as you probably know, we are the only ones that actually have a window for Canadians on the world, and the world on Canadians through Canadian eyes. So we look at this. We then look at what is the cost in that particular slot, in that particular program, of that particular show. What will it then bring? And we then balance that with respect to the resources that we have. People make calls on the interest that audiences have, and whether those show differentiate CBC enough, and whether they are still part and in the center of our mandate. Patricia, you're much closer to that than me. What would you add?
Well, I was going to add that the choices about what to keep on the air once they're on the air are exactly as Hubert was describing. One of the issues, however, is to get them on the air. And as you certainly know, we don't produce drama in-house. Drama, all fiction, in fact, is produced with the contributions of the Canada Media Fund, the CMF, or the FMC en français. And so that process in and of itself is a complex one, and it's an extremely complicated set of criteria that we have to follow in order to get our projects approved. So even sometimes with programming that we are convinced would be a really good reflection of our country, or would be a really good storyline, if it's not accepted, or if it doesn't factor into the criteria and the point system, we may not get that on the air, because we are not using exclusively our own funding, and therefore our own decision-making process to put those programs on the air. And that certainly is attached to performance, because one of the very important criteria in the CMF is performance on the air. So it's a bit of a vicious circle in that if you put on the air programming, if it is accepted by the CMF and you put it on the air and it's not performing and you keep it there, then the following year your envelope is reduced in consequence. So that's where the fine balance between quality and popularity is a factor in our decision making.
Thank you. Turning just now to the local programming improvement fund, that I believe that began in 2008, I think. That was meant to phase out at some point. Is that correct, or can you maybe just provide some background on that?
I think that it was supposed to be a bridge. I think the CRTC saw a hole in the way local programming was done in the country. I think that I think the actors, I think the people that actually had access to the fund, because it was not only us, is anybody. I mean, the criteria were there, and if you meet the criteria, you actually were able to trigger some funding. I think it suited exactly what we did, so that's why I think we were successful in triggering funding from the local programming improvement fund. The life of that fund was not determined at the beginning, and we were, and Jean-Pierre Blais knows this, because I've repeated it many, many times. Jean-Pierre Blais is the chairman of the CRTC. For us, this was a really big disappointment, and I think a very negative decision on what we brought and what other broadcasters brought to support programming in the communities when they decided to get there. Because, frankly, it was a pass-on. If you had your cable bill, you saw $1.22 or something charged to Canadians to support programming in the different communities.
Right. All right then. Have you? I'm just curious. Have you looked at with the challenges, with some of the budgetary pressures that you've seen, whether it's from some of the decisions that have been made in Ottawa, some of the market decisions that are much more recent? Have you examined alternate funding models that don't involve either a tax or a forced levy, like the British TV tax, for example, that you could consider as a way to boost revenues?
Thank you, Mr. Williamson. Monsieur Lacroix?
So the funding models that CBC could have access to involve changing the model for everybody that's in there. Because if you decide that we have access or a different access to the Canadian Media Fund, you're immediately impacting everybody else that has access to that fund. If you decide that we're going ad-free, okay, let's say that, okay, the public broadcaster should be going ad-free, that's $250 to $300 million a year. We give that back to the privates. The privates then have access to those advertisers. We don't. How are you going to then allow the public broadcaster to get those dollars back in a stable way? So is it going to be a government incentive? Is it going to be a tax on your television set like in the UK? Is it going to be something on the new internet providers that they're going to have to pay some portion, like they did in Europe, in France and in Spain, a portion of some line on your P&L? All of these are available, but they involve having a conversation, an open conversation, and rethinking the whole of the model. This is not only a CBC Radio-Canada situation, but it's one in which we're directly involved. And when we went with the private broadcasters and sat for the first time, frankly, in our history, Mr. Williamson, with CTV and with TVA and with Rogers, and we sat and we told the CRTC, this makes no sense, value for signal is going to be important for the conventional broadcasters to live, that was a very strong signal. Keith Pelly, who heads Rogers, was in front of the CRTC on the license renewals of Omni and of CityTV 3 weeks ago. The numbers that he threw at the CRTC as how much money they were bleeding on their conventional networks and saying that this is not going to work, and the next people that are going to show up in front of you, CTV and Global, they're also going to tell you that their conventional model doesn't work. This is why this is a solution, not a solution, but this is something that needs to be addressed as an industry. We're there. We're involved. We're stuck in the middle. We don't have the platforms that the other broadcasters have, nor the integration that they have to support the conventional broadcaster.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Lacroix. Mr. Godin.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Premièrement,
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Let's not forget that today, on the 1st of May, it's May Day and workers' holiday, if you will. I'd like to salute them all in Canada, no matter where they might be found. Without workers, we wouldn't be anywhere. Coming back to the question that Madame Saint-Denis was discussing, you may not like this question, but perhaps you might give me a response to Mr. Ron MacLean. Will he continue like Don Cherry to insult Francophones? I mean, you're the boss, right? Do you have any intention of doing anything about this? It's public TV, public broadcaster. It represents the taxpayers of Canada. And comments like this are very divisive. It's quite annoying. It's unacceptable. And Monsieur Lacroix, I'll call you Mr. Lacroix, you have a responsibility of bringing him to heel. Well, from what I know of the story and the context of the comments of Ron during the match, his comments during that first game were immediately corrected. He corrected them. In the second game, he tried to explain what he had meant, and he made a bad choice of words. I think everyone here, at one time or another, has misspoken, and that's what happened in this case. I heard his apology, and to my mind, the case is closed. The file is closed. We certainly don't want this to be repeated because Mr. Don Cherry almost had it as a point of honor to continue that. Mr. Don Cherry is no longer, or will no longer be employed by CBC Radio-Canada. He was invited to become an employee of another organization, as you know full well. And no, but I'd like you to understand my perspective of this. We have two peoples here. We have to come to some agreement. We have to live in harmony, and there's no point in provoking. It's too bad that we have to wait till a person retires or ceases employment before we put an end to this kind of thing. Now, well, you know, there was another owner of a basketball team recently who made some comments too. But anyway, let's get back to some cuts. We're talking about official languages, and I'm taking a look at this chart that you gave us. And you know that for us in the regions, these cuts in minority language situations, they hurt. They cut deep. I think you're quite aware of that. We have a group within Radio-Canada. Céline Galipeau was part of it, sent a letter and said over the years we have perfected and our methods in order to become more and more efficient, but we're getting to a point, a critical breaking point here. We will have to make a choice very soon between programming and information programming. If you take a look at St. John's, New Brunswick, St. John, New Brunswick, one Anglophone, no Francophone. Moncton, 7 no Francophones. In Victoria, 1 Francophone, no Anglophones. If we take a look at all the cuts, English, 334 assignment, and Francophones, 323. 33 million Canadians, 33 million, 8 million French speaking, and the cuts were just about at parity between both groups. I don't think we should see any cuts at Radio-Canada. Now, if I'm getting upset and talking about these cuts, it's my preferred TV. That's who I listen to. That's what I listen to. And in Acadia, I think it's pretty much that. If we didn't have CBC Radio-Canada in my part of the country, we wouldn't have anything. So these cuts are really not balanced. 7 cuts in Moncton, that's going to hurt. That's going to really damage programming. I could take the whole 5 minutes to try to show you and point out to you just how unbalanced that these cuts have been. And somebody like Céline Galipeau, a very objective person, has said the same thing. We're going towards a complete breakdown of the system. Now, you have to defend this Crown Corporation, and yet you're caught in a very conflictual type of situation. Yeah, you have to fulfill a mandate, and you're saying $29 per Canadian, whereas in other countries it's almost $100. Things are going very badly here, not only for Radio-Canada, but also for the public broadcaster in Canada per se. Where are we going to end up with all of this? Well, I'm very glad to know that you're one of our listeners. No, I do. I listen. Let's start on a positive note then. Yes, okay, I look at the chart and I see that seven positions will be eliminated in New Brunswick. 7 positions. Now, I don't want to say that there are 5 in Toronto, there's more than that, and start these comparisons. What I think, let's not lose sight of the big picture here. These budgetary cuts are going to hurt CBC Radio-Canada. You can't have a few $100 million evaporate from the budget without it having some consequence. So yes, there's going to be cuts, and the reason that you may seem that, or it seems that it's not quite in balance, it's because of the choices that we've made, our production methods. We're doing more in-house at Radio-Canada. 60 cents of each dollar invested in CBC Radio-Canada is payroll dollar. So when we do this kind of compressions, it's going to cost jobs, FTEs, full-time equivalents. You know, this is not a manufacturing plant. These are individuals who are creating a creative or artistic product. So 60 cents on the dollar is payroll. 82 million have been cut, and 42 million at Radio-Canada, 82 at CBC. We have a very broad mandate. We have financing which is becoming scarcer and scarcer. The mandate will suffer, yes, but the reason that all these cuts are happening, because of all these cuts, this is why Patricia will sit down with Louis Lalonde and say, well, we have to find it somewhere. And we take into consideration every element that we can, the regions, network programming, etc. Perhaps Patricia could explain the process by which we arrive at some of these hard choices. Thank you very much, Mr. Ward. Well, we'll perhaps try to answer the question a little bit later. Go ahead, sir. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Your directors of communications and media said these choices are due to budgetary cuts and not to policy choices. Well, the cuts and the changes that we've announced on the 10th of April last was based on a number of factors. These factors broadly are market-based. We lost hockey, for example, and hockey was very influential within the Canadian society, not only Radio-Canada and CBC, but on the entire programming matrix. Radio-Canada, many advertisers were buying a package, whether it be CBC or Radio-Canada, a combination of the moratorium on salaries announced by Mr. Flaherty in his economic statement in November last. A whole number of factors enter into play here when we make our choices. Above and beyond the $380 million, so a combination of factors such that we just don't have any, there's no more fat to cut, there's no margin for maneuver at all. Well, 40 years ago or so, we had 2 choices. We had TVA, Radio-Canada, CFTM as well. All right. So over the years, over time, CBC, because perhaps a preferential choice, but over the People today have enormous amounts of choice. It's not just 3 or 4 stations. How are you going to maintain your ratings over the next years to capture or retain, if you don't already have, a younger audience? Because if you lose the next generation of audience, it's going to be impossible to make it up. Well, allow me an example, if you will. We are extremely aware that we're going through a transition period and things are changing quite rapidly. There's a whole generation which is still very, very loyal to the traditional platforms for their media consumption. But there's a new generation, an upcoming generation, which is very much digital. And they're completely unplugged or we've cut the cord to the traditional platforms. They don't spend a nickel on the traditional TV, radio. Let me try to explain how we're trying to find a new equilibrium, a bit of bridge these two generations or these two tendencies, these two realities that we find throughout the country. Next Tuesday, we're going to launch a new series that we've created, documentaries on the 1812 war. A new series. The narration will be Claude Lafort, who's doing it. Claude Legault, rather, sorry. An excellent series that we hope to air soon. We're promoting it. We've been promoting it, or we shall be promoting it, of course, running up to the launch date. So we've put it on the web. It's available now, immediately, for those who prefer to consume their media product on a digital mobile platform or another platform, and who may never sit down in front of your TV in the living room. So we've tried to bridge the generation gap, or not generations, but user preferences, if you will. Of course, it also is reflected in the generations, but it's not just that. You spoke of Tout le monde en parle. For people who are on the move on a Sunday, we are, for example, if you put this on a mobile platform, would it not be easier for all Canadians?
Well, I would say one thing. We have a number of different mediums. If it works for Tout le monde en parle, it's because, well, people are talking. It's not a show that's based on visuals, but on conversation. On radio, it's the human voice, conversation, exchanges that are important. And that's why, among all of the programs, we found that this was an important rendezvous for people. It's something that people can't miss Sunday nights on Radio-Canada. And Monday morning, everyone's talking about it. That's what Tout le monde en parle means. Everyone's discussing what they saw. So that's a strategy for us to make sure that we meet with our audience. And I can tell you that Sunday nights, if you listen to the radio, with all the love that I have for Première Chaîne Radio-Canada that I love, if you're listening to the radio Sunday night, it's probably because either you don't have an interest for television or because you're on the road and you don't have access to a television. And so that was a way for us to make sure that we could offer a service to those who don't want to miss this essential program for Francophones in Canada. And congratulations for that, because there are a lot of Canadians like me who travel a lot during the week, and we're very lucky to, if we find the time, to listen to our favorite programs. And I can tell you that I listen to a lot. I listen to Radio-Canada's radio a lot. It's very interesting, and I don't see the time go by when I'm on the road listening to that. So thank you very much. Oh, thank you for those comments. Thank you. Mr. Nichols.
Moment, I'm going to ask you to confirm if these 10 job cuts in Quebec are the only ones that will be made. But before I do that, it being the 1st of May, I want to note one worker in particular that is today out of a job, which is Pierre Landry. Pierre Landry in CBC Montreal, this is a man who announces important cultural happenings in Montreal. He just recently won the ADISQ Cultural Columnist of the Year. Mr. Landry was a man that promoted Francophone music to the Anglophone population of Quebec, bridging the gap between the solitudes. And his contributions, Mr. Landry's contributions, go directly toward the mandate of promoting official languages. Anglophones in Montreal are largely employed in the cultural sector, and this loss of Mr. Landry on the airwaves will harm our community. I can just tell you the voice of the people, Kelly Gregg, who says, huge hugs today for Pierre Landry, an amazing reporter, mentor, desk mate, and friend who I had the honor of working with on CBC Home Run. Nicolas Boulay, sad to hear that Pierre Landry will no longer be the culture reporter, Home Run on CBC Cuts. Emily Scahan, crushed to hear CBC terminated the best person they ever hired. No one cares more about the artistic integrity of Montreal than Pierre Landry. Steve Faggy, who asks, so, who other than Pierre Landry is getting laid off from CBC in Quebec? I'm making a list. Tous mes pensées vont à Pierre Landry, ex-collègue de Musique Plus.
My thoughts go to Pierre Landry, whose job was cut at CBC. You've done great work. Good luck.
I couldn't believe this when I heard it. Anyone who listens to CBC knows that you are one of the best we have. These cuts hurt. Tanya McGinty, what? No, not Pierre Landry. He's a cultural icon here in Montreal. Steve Rukavina, again, just unbelievably sad to be losing dedicated, friendly, fun colleague Pierre Landry to CBC Cuts. This is just to put a face. Okay, we're talking about numbers here in committee, but there's people there that have contributed to the mandate of CBC that are losing their positions today and will continue to lose across the country, and it's going to harm our community in Montreal. I mean, I could keep going with the tweets on, but Ms. Kinch, can you confirm to us that these 10 cuts will be the final ones to be made to English services in Quebec?
Oh, yes. And I can't tell you how much I agree with you that Pierre Landry is a loss. This was not an easy decision to make. It did not come simply. There was a lot of discussion about it, and we're very sorry to have to end his contract. As I said, it wasn't simple. We have a very large arts unit within the CBC, a large cultural arts unit within Montreal, and we do believe in cultural and arts programming, and we will continue to fulfill that mandate. We already have, as you know, programs that do that, specifically Apropos with Jim Corcoran, C'est la vie with Bernard Saint-Laurent. Those shows have not been cut. We've preserved those programs. We will continue, as I said, on Home Run to be able to provide that strong cultural content as well. We have Brendan Kelly on Daybreak, who also plays that role. Yes, Pierre Landry is a big loss. I absolutely agree with you, but we are still committed to our mandate of providing cultural programming.
I'm just worried in terms of, Pierre Landry was crucial in mentioning events that were going on around town for people to go and check out, and so it will be a big loss.
That won't be
You mentioned that those are the cuts to be made now. Does that imply that there will be further cuts down the road than these 10?
You know what? I can't predict, and I'm actually going to pass that question to you, Bear.
And Mr. Nichols, first off, I thank you for putting a face, because when I look at this, I look at numbers, but every morning when I wake up, I realize that we've just affected the lives of 647 people. And the admin assistant who just lost her job is as important as Pierre. The technician that lost his job and that allows a Céline or a Peter Mansbridge to be able to deliver, that's as important. They are, and there's 647 stories today of people who are affected. Those are the choices that we have to make. The mandate that I have is to ensure that we have a balanced budget. Those are the choices. They come with it. And we have to balance, and I think Sheila's comment is important, we have to balance. Are we going to still be able to meet the mandate and deliver and tell you what's going on in Montreal? If the answer is yes, how are we going to do this differently? And that's the answer to your question.
Okay. Thank you very much. Mr. Daniel.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, witnesses, again. Just following on from my previous discussions, how does your workforce costs compare with some of the other broadcasters?
that's a difficult question because the other broadcasters don't have to put up any numbers. It's so integrated that I don't know what the cost, for example, of the workforce at CTV or Global is. So I can't answer that question except guessing, and I'm not going to guess.
Okay, no problem. During your last appearance in front of this committee back in January of 2013, you spoke about the activities that the CPC would undertake for the 150th anniversary of Canada. Can you give us an update on these activities and where you're going with that?
The 150th is obviously part of what we have. Let me do this again. The 150th is a key part of the mandate and what we think we should be doing for Canadians. As you know, we started that conversation with a number of meetings across the country. We put that into a book. We have offered our minister access to all of the information that we have so that if she wants to, she can tap into this and actually help map out the kind of activities. I'm not, I mean, I could update you later on because I don't have that information in front of me of where we were. I think we've parked a few things just to see how these numbers fall and how these cuts fall. But the 150th is something that is germane, it's central to what we do, and we understand that.
Okay, thank you. So I'm now going to come back to my thing about education and engineering and staff like that. Clearly you're going to be transitioning from the existing infrastructure that you have to the newer infrastructures that you will need for the future. And I'm really looking to see what your plans are in actually making that transition.
This is a complicated question, and I'm not simply saying it's a complicated question to make the answer more difficult. We are literally trying to drive the car on the highway, third lane, as fast as we can to keep up what's going on in the world and changing the tires at the same time, because we can't park the car as all of these technologies are changing. We told you a few minutes ago, people are still watching live television. More than 80% of Canadians, 85% of Canadians are watching it in a linear way. So we can't take all of the infrastructure and shift it over. The timing, the metrics, and the indicators that we have and that we are following to make sure that when we decide that we're no longer over the air, but we're all digital, for example, either on television and radio over time, and we're talking years now, we're not talking months, is what we look at based on research with Canadians, based on habits, based on information, based on new technology. I keep telling people, you know, Vancouver, the Olympics, there was no iPad. That's not like 40 years ago. That's 2010. There was no iPad in the context of the Olympics. So that's why we can't decide that we're shifting too fast or too slow. That's our challenge. That's what we do every day.
Okay. In terms of the funding model that you're looking at with against other countries, have you actually taken a look at how their geography and population is impacted, given that Canada is such a large country, spread over such a large area with a relatively small population compared to many of these countries?
The answer is absolutely. In the context of the next strategy, we've spoken to 11 or 12 broadcasters at length. I have special relationships with Mark Scott, who's the head of the ABC, the Australian Broadcasting Corporation, because I think that of all the countries in the world, Australia is the closest thing to Canada. Big, big country, populated on its borders, important Aboriginal roots, immigrant, very important and dedicated immigrants. I mean, you look at this, it's spectacularly similar to ours. They have challenges. We speak all the time. I'm supposed to see them in a month or so. The BBC is also obviously a person that we have spectacular relationships with, and we share our research, and obviously France Télévisions and the French. So we can't think of the public broadcaster in Canada as being alone on an island. In the 18 people that we are there, we have constant conversations with. We share our knowledge, our challenges, our breakthroughs. We show numbers. We exchange information on technology. We do this on a daily basis.
Okay, thank you very much. Madame Saint-Denis.
Oui, je voudrais revenir
Thank you. I'd like to go back to Tout le monde en parle. It's a program that is produced privately, as you know. The fact that it's so popular, and so popular that you put it on the radio as well, is this an advantage or a disadvantage for Radio-Canada? You purchased the rights to this program, but does it cost less if you broadcast it onto platforms? How does this affect your regional programs? Do you have an accumulated budget for this? I would say that no, it's not an advantage. Certainly, it doesn't cost less to do that because obviously a program like that, we can't just broadcast a program without packaging, if you will, without adjusting the fact that on Radio-Canada Première there's no advertising, there's no revenue, and so programming must be done to fill the advertising time that we have on television. But it's not a question of radio become television without images. That's not a model for radio, and it's certainly not our intention to end up there. I explained the very specific context of that program, and it's only under those circumstances that this model was worth testing to see if that audience could be served or well served that way, but it's not a financial advantage to us. And the cuts, all the job cuts and program cuts in the regions that you've talked about, could we hope that this is temporary or is this definitive? Through the changes to certain production practices, do you think this could come back or is it done? Well, the choices that we had to make this year will not be changed. We had to make the difficult choice of cutting local programming on Espace Musique, for example, and I don't see how we could go back on that. This was a project that we had hoped to continue moving forward with over several phases. We didn't have the means to do that. We were forced to cut 2 years ago the programming in the afternoon, and this is the last cut to Espace Musique in the regions. This is not something we can go back on. Same thing in the regions of Quebec, for example. We didn't mention this earlier because it doesn't concern official language minority communities. But in Quebec, we had to cut 3 Saturday morning programs, 3 regional programs. And that was part of the very difficult choices that we had to make in a context where funding is not going up. As you know, we have no revenue-based funding for our radio stations, and so we had to make those choices in the regions, and I don't think that we can go back on those decisions. Do you think that now that there's no longer a national hockey program, will you be able to promote amateur sports on television? Well, for the reasons that I explained earlier, programs that we broadcast are chosen according to a large number of criteria. For example, their ability to generate money for us, that's very important. When we announced the end of our attempt to get professional sports rights, we said that amateur sports can no longer be, for us, something that will cost us money. So if we can find a model that allows us to cover amateur sports without seeing a negative effect on our balance sheet, we'll do it, obviously. We've broadcast a lot of amateur sports over the years on CBC Radio-Canada, and again, this is part of the choices we've had to make. There will be fewer broadcasts of these sports.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you again for the opportunity. I feel that the need to kind of raise a couple of issues in light of the I think support you have coming from the official opposition in particular about the importance of the CBC, in particular after Mr. Godin's comments with respect to asking you to effectively censor one of your on-air personalities. I'd be curious to get your comments. I mean, my view is that if there's indifference to the CBC across the country, it's because at best you're a network that appeals to only half the nation. Mr. Nicholas just read off some Twitter on May Day. If we wanted to have this meeting yesterday on tax filing day, I could read off some tweets from outraged taxpayers when it comes to their tax bills and a desire not to pay any more. I'd like you to comment a little bit. One of the issues I have with the CBC is my concern. While you're committed to a diverse workforce, one of your flaws, I think, is you don't seem to be committed to a diversity of opinion within your news gathering and your on-air commentary. And I think until you resolve that, there's at best going to be, in one half of the country, broad support for the CBC and, frankly, indifference in the other half of the country. I'd invite your comments. Thank you.
Mr. Williamson, diversity of opinion, diversity of voices is something that Jennifer Maguire, who is the editor-in-chief at CBC, and Michel Cormier, who does that in French, are so focused on and report on a regular basis at the board level and in the context of the indicators that we have through the programs and through our journalistic standards. Diversity of opinion is what we think differentiates us from just about anybody out there. So it is at the heart of what we do in information. It's monitored, it's reported on, it's researched. We actually ask Canadians in the context of surveys that we do we think we reflect diversity of voices? And obviously, one has different opinions, and your perception of it is so. One day, maybe I'll be able to change your perception of it. But I can assure you that diversity of voices is key to the delivery of information at CBC Radio-Canada. Do you want to add something to that?
Just perhaps simply that not only is it monitored, but certainly on Radio-Canada, and I think it's the same thing at CBC, we have managers who have been, in fact, assigned the responsibility of working with our teams to ensure that that is monitored. And every time that we have major events such as elections, there are outside teams that are brought together so that we have advisory groups, panels of citizens who help us monitor the way in which we do our work.
And as you know, Mr. Williamson, we're the only organization in the country that has an ombudsman on the English side, on the French side. And if you look at the rulings of the ombudsman takes a very important role and has a very important role in being completely independent from the system and applies the rules. And when they see something that is not according to our standards, our journalistic standards, they will call us on.
But what, and I agree on election night, your panels come together from across the country, you bring in outside viewpoints. But I mean, what do you say to the numerous critics you have that really say when it comes to political reporting, the CBC really is just a left-lib echo chamber? There is no ideological diversity of opinion. I mean, I could go through the panel or the hosts you have here in Ottawa, and highlight the, Evan, liberal, Rosie, liberal, Terry, uber liberal, and I'm not talking big L, I'm talking small L here. And I think a number of years ago, a former colleague of mine, we worked at the National Post together, Ezra Levant, appeared before the CBC board and challenged the board, can you identify a single small C conservative voice you have in your outlet? I think they pointed to Don Cherry, and Ezra rightly chuckled at that because, of course, he was doing hockey commentary, and as you just pointed out, he'll be on his way out shortly. So even by that measure, you're losing perhaps the one conservative voice you have in the outlet. And again, I'm talking small C. I'm not talking a partisan conservative.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Williamson. I'll allow you, Mr. Lacroix, to respond.
Mr. Chairman.
Okay. Point of order from Mr. Godin.
There's a difference between news and insulting people.
I will give the last word to Mr. Lacroix.
Mr. Chairman,
Lacroix, go ahead.
I'm not going to go through because we have 40 seconds. the different pieces of what we do and name people, because I don't frankly know which color, which political party our journalists actually vote for when they are in their box. Their job, and this is what differentiates us from everybody else, their job is to bring a diversity of opinion, diversity of voices to Canadians. It's extremely important. Our manager, and to challenge, and it's very important. Our managers know this. We have indicators that follow it, and when we feel that we don't do the job, we correct.
Okay, thank you very much to Monsieur Lacroix, Madame Plazinska, and Madame Kinch for your testimony. Appreciate all the comments and questions from members of the committee. This meeting is adjourned.